Huckleberry Creek campfire song, hanging with the Sasquatch all night long. Leave peanut butter at your gift inside. Listen to the hoot and howl is all through the night. Walk through the night.
So often I have heard the ardent skeptic exclaim, if they existed, we'd have good pictures of them. Everyone has a camera, and people always carry their phones, etc., etc. That this person knows absolutely nothing about photography is obvious. That he knows even less about the primal people and how they are most often viewed is even more obvious. That there are excellent photos and videos around that show them in fine form is also true. But this skeptic rejects those out of hand as being hoaxed in one way or another. Never really explained by it, since he really has no idea. He's just rejecting the possibility of Sasquatch's existence, and to accept any of these would mean he would be speaking counter to his own argument. One only has to look as far as the Patterson-Gimlin film, Paul Freeman, Memorial Day footage, Marble Mountain, Provo Canyon, or the Independence Day footage to see very fine examples. There are private photos and video which our skeptics will never see, that are very high quality, but are never shown because of the lack of respect in our world and the presence of so many abject idiots. Please understand this as well. There are many, many photographs out there that are perfectly legitimate and do show a Sasquatch individual, even though we cannot see it. But the photographer saw the individual prior to taking the photo. But since a camera is not nearly as good as the eye, the photo is less than sterling. Often, one must judge the contents of a photo based on their history with the photographer. But that is beyond the scope of this essay. We are here to discuss why getting that $1 million shot is so very difficult. Let us begin. Why are my photos blurry? One of the most disturbing phenomena in the Sasquatch research world is the inability to obtain good, clear, high-quality photographs of our subject. Many theories have evolved from this inability that range from the sublime to the ridiculous. I will attempt in the next few minutes, as a former professional photographer, to offer an explanation why this is so. The first problem encountered in this field is the fact that no one, with the rare exception, other than professional photographers, have professional equipment. Almost all people buy consumer-grade camera gear or try to use their telephone and expect professional-grade results. It is simply not going to happen. The second factor that coincides with the first is that they never learn to use even their consumer-grade equipment to anywhere near its capacity. The first thing they do along this line is to set it on automatic and expect that to provide them with the grade of output they desire. Again, it's not going to happen. As a professional photographer in the era of film and paper print, for those with long enough memory to still recall them, I never owned a camera with an automatic feature on it. I set my lens speed manually, I set my f-stop manually, and I focused it manually. Why did I do this? Very simply stated, because I wanted to be in control of what the camera did. The first thing one must understand about a camera is that there are two factors that control the exposure to light. The total number of photons of light striking the film will determine the exposure on that film. We could also, in those old times, choose films that had various speeds depending on the type of work we were doing. Generally speaking, we used a relatively slow film for outside sunny day work and a faster film for indoor or other low-light photography. Standard for consumer photography was a film with an ASA rating of 100, 200, or 400. There were others available to the professional. In addition, you could expose ASA 400 film as high as a 1600 shutter setting, called pushing, for extreme indoor work where a flash was not feasible or was not allowed. I have some beautiful photographs taken at ball games inside the old Kingdom without a flash using just this technique. I once exposed a roll like this and dropped it off at a corner drugstore type film processing outlet and was told it was impossible to do that. I just said, "Oh, really? Does that mean I have to give back the hundreds of frames that I've already done this way very successfully?" I got no answer. With a given film speed, the amount of light, that is the number of photons that strike the film, is controlled by two factors. One, the time the lens is open, that's the shutter speed, and how far it opens, that's the f-stop. As is readily apparent, the longer a shutter is open, the more light that is allowed to pass through. Likewise, the further it opens, the more photons will pass through. These factors become important when we introduce another factor called depth of field into the equation. The depth of field basically is an area of, or depth of that area of the subject photographed that will be in focus. This is controlled by the f-stop setting on the lens. The higher the f-stop, the greater the depth of field. In the illusion shown, it is obvious that the f-stop is low, as there is a very short area of the barbed wire that is in focus. In cameras with lenses capable of very low f-stops, it is possible to have your depth of field so tight that you may have the button on the shirt in focus, while everything in front of it and behind it is blurred. It should be merely noted here that longer focal length lenses require higher f-stops, where the focal length is the distance from the film or sensor to the actual lens. In short focal lengths like 28mm lens, f-stops of 1.4 or even lower are possible, while a longer lens, like a 200mm lens, cannot have an f-stop below the 4.5 range. Shutter speed is usually marked in increments of a part of a second, i.e., a shutter speed setting of 8 will mean the lens will be open for 1/8 of a second, while a shutter speed of 1600 means it will only be open for 1/1600th of a second. As you can imagine, the former setting will let in much more light than the latter, since it is open 20 times longer in the same condition. This is critical in low light settings where shutter speeds of 8 and even less are needed to get sufficient light to the film for proper exposure. Even at 8, the camera should be on a tripod to prevent blur due to motion induced by the person holding the camera. Since the f-stop and the shutter speed are manipulated together to achieve the desired exposure, the depth of field becomes even shorter in low-light situations. This is a very quick, very cursory explanation of what is actually a very technical facet of photography, but it serves to explain the circumstances for what is in focus in a shot. And this is with me controlling the setting. If one allows the automatic setting to take over, there is no control over this most important of all aspects of photography. The next major problem occurs with the automatic focusing in modern cameras. With my fully manual cameras, I chose precisely what I wanted to focus on. I didn't have to worry about what was not in focus. With autofocus, the camera decides what it wants to focus on, and that is usually the most massive or most dense object in its field of view. In September of 2014, we gathered in our research area in British Columbia, Canada. While there, I was enjoying the opportunity to commune with the natives. The two photographs shown here, labeled Figure 1 and Figure 2, were taken one immediately after the other. The Stellar J was my object, but I had my Canon SX500 camera in autofocus mode and shot first one, then the other exposure. Notice that in Figure 1, the camera chose to focus well behind my subject, and the cedar tree behind the J is sharply in focus. In Figure 2, the camera decided that the hemlock tree in the foreground was my desired object of focus, and it is very clear and defined in the picture. In neither case are they my intended subject. Mr. J, the chosen object, so remains out of focus in both examples. Let's talk about energy. The other major reason for the blurry outcome of our Sasquatch photos is the high level of energy that seems to surround them. Description after description and account after account speak of the energy level associated with them. From accounts of the hair on one's arm standing on end to the fact that batteries that were new and fully charged at one moment seem to be useless and powerless the next moment indicate that there is an energy field associated with them. Personally, I have had the battery discharge phenomenon occur on more than one occasion, and I've had that hair on end feeling so very many times, even though I am not in any way intimidated by them or their proximity. I have been compliant with them for decades and have long since left fear and apprehension in my wake. The many accounts of being zapped by these fellows may well be an application of and a manifestation toward the presence of this energy field. In my perambulations across the remote regions of our nation, I have, when in the areas frequented by these locals, encountered many manifestations of this energy field. But one of my most significant occurred a few summers ago when with my friend and research partner Brian near his home in British Columbia. We had spent more than a few days in the bush there, walking, watching, photographing, and enjoying all nature had to offer. This area was one of our main centers for our research for our Project Alpha investigations into the Sasquatch written language. There is a large and concentrated family that resides in that general area, and we have become on a first-name basis with several of that clan. On the day in question, Brian and I were scouting for a specific spot for our planned September gathering, which was to be held in that area. In that scout, we came to our preferred area and spent some time looking. This was an area of profound activity, and we were seldom disappointed and often greatly rewarded. This was to be such a day. As we explored the area, we found a number of areas where the small stones had been amassed and piled into diminutive rock mounds. On one occasion, we came across an area especially rich in signs, and in the glyphs we were chronicling. It was one of those hair-on-end spots where you could literally feel the energy in the air. I was by myself when I found it, but called Brian to me quite soon after seeing it. It was innocuous, just a stone about 7 inches in diameter in the plane in which I could see it, and a pale green in color, such as one would find in some high-pressure granitic deposits. It had occlusions in it. I assume they were quartz, but I'm not sure of that. I thought to pick it up, but felt pressured to leave it where it was. So I determined to photograph it in situ, which I proceeded to attempt. At once, I could not get the camera to focus on it with the camera in automatic mode. I tried more than a couple of times to get a decent photograph of it without success. I changed the setting and again attempted to get the stone in focus, to no avail. I simply could not focus on that stone. The photo shown indicates it was but a simple stone, but notice that nothing around it is in focus, nor is the stone itself. But this is the best photo out of the several attempts I made. When we returned to Brian's home that evening, we discussed this at great length, and when we arose the next morning, we determined to return to it and try once more. On arrival, we parked Brian's car and walked to the spot I'd photographed the prior day, and all was as it was then, except the stone was gone. It simply was not there. Brian quizzed me to make sure I was in the right spot, and I knew I was, but that stone was simply gone. While I stood at the tree I knew to be the prior resting place for this stone, Brian circled me in expanding concentric circles while looking for that rock. I mean, how far can a rock walk just overnight? At a range of some 20 feet, Brian said, "Hey, look what I found." I looked up, asking what he'd encountered. Then he showed me a tiny stone with a face of sorts on it. We often make a game of finding faces in the naturally occurring structures, but this fellow was pretty cool to me. So he now resides on my desk by my computer, and we call him Teeny Bud. Conclusions. Next time you see a picture posted and wonder, why is this not clearer? Think of the above. Most of the problems stem from non-professional people attempting to take professional-grade pictures with sub-grade equipment and non-professional knowledge. A few are probably the result of some kind of energy field distorting our vision or the vision of our camera. This phenomena is readily apparent on a hot day. One merely has to look across the field or down a road to see the effect of this kind of energy-caused distortion. In final conclusion, I'd ask you to look at the photograph now showing. This was provided to me by Thom, a First Nations person from BC, Canada, who now lives in Washington. If you look closely at that, you see inside that screen of brush a very in-focus primal person, a Sasquatch. That picture is CGI, computer generated. It has to be. Why? Because of the things we have been speaking of. You cannot focus on the brush on the outside and the object in the middle and have them both be as clear as this picture shows them to be. One or the other would have to be out of focus. I would hate to have to make my living trying to take a picture that focused on that Sasquatch being inside that brush line, and certainly not with an automatic focus camera. You would never see more than a black, amorphous blob at any time using automatic equipment unless you had the most expensive, most proficient equipment available and was well trained on it. The type of equipment that would cost you $3,000 to $8,000 just for the camera body. Then start adding $1,500, $2,000 lenses to that. Now you understand some of the problem. So when somebody says, why don't we have any pictures? Tell them. Because we don't have any photographers and they know how to hide. That's the bottom line. They aren't standing out in the open like Cousin George at graduation. They're standing in the brush, next to a tree, behind a tree, anywhere to cause you to not be able to focus well on them.
Beat on the drum and play the kalimba. Throw another log on and make the fire bigger. Fill in the air with warm laughter and songs. Hanging with the Sasquatch all night long. All night long and all night long. Thank you for the thumbprints and thank you for the footprints and thank you for the eyes shine over in the distance. Thank you for the hoots and thank you for the hollers. Thank you for new friendship with the people who gather. The people who gather. The people who gather. Gabby still walks with us in spirit. There was just a wood knock, can you tell me, did you hear it? Gabby, we miss you more than ever. You're bombed with barb, continues forever. Continues forever. Continues forever. Yeah, it's a Huckleberry Creek campfire song, hanging with the Sasquatch all night long. Eat peanut butter at your gift inside and listen to the hoot and all is all through the night.